Welcome to Field 302, Study Session 7, Reading a Philosophical Write-Up. Introduction. Reading is no doubt very important in philosophical research and writing, as a cognitive process of deciphering symbols in order to derive meaning, and as an interaction between what is read and the reader, strongly influenced by the reader's prior knowledge, experiences, attitude, and language community. Reading provides the writer meanings, ideas, and evidences on the basis of which he writes and evaluates what he has written. In philosophical research and writing, much of the research done for the sake of writing is through reading, bearing in mind that the philosopher goes to no lab nor carry out experiments while engaging in research. Much of what he or she gathers as evidence for his or her write-up is from what he or she reads and reviews. Philosophical writing is thus more or less literature review, a review of already written ideas and thoughts. In this study session, therefore, we pay attention to some general but essential principles that can aid a writer in philosophy to achieve the primary aims of reading a philosophical work: deciphering or deriving meanings and ideas, gaining understanding, and identifying flaws in arguments presented. These principles include reading the essay a number of times carefully and analyzing the arguments contained. Objective: to understand the importance of reading in philosophical research and writing, to highlight and explain some general principles guiding the adequate reading of a philosophical essay. A quick glance to get the gist. The first time one reads through a text or an essay in philosophy, it is recommended that one does not pause and ponder over every single word or idea, trying to get everything point before moving on. Doing so will make reading the essay difficult and uninteresting. The first thing to do, however, is to let one's eyes pass over the page, reading every word to get a general sense of the essay. Perhaps the reader can start by reading carefully through the introduction and conclusion, because these are usually the places where one can get the gist and summary of what the argument is about. When this is done, the reader should ask himself or herself what the article is about. What aspect of philosophy does it deal with? Which topic, concept, or theory does it investigate? What were some of the key words that the philosopher kept mentioning? In what sense does the author use these specific terms or concepts? Such questions help to prepare the mind by stirring up prior knowledge of the issue at hand, and such a mental state is very valuable for reading. Once this is done, the entire essay can be read through to get the general sense of the paper and the argument it contains. It is very important to also get the sense in which key concepts are used in an essay, that is, how they are defined. Once a reader gets these definitions, a big chunk of the work is done. Usually, a definition is the starting point of an argument, and for the most part, the rest of the argument builds on that definition. It is also important to pay attention to the way a philosopher presents his or her argument in his write-up. Hence, a reader should pay attention to the signposts that signal important moves in a philosopher's argument. Such signposts may include the use of words or phrases such as because, since, given the argument, thus, therefore, hence, consequently, in the first instance, on the other hand, and flowing from above. A careful perusal for analysis and questioning. After reading through the essay for the first time and getting the feel of the language, the key concept and their usage, and the reader can begin to formulate the author's argument. It is time to go back to carefully reread the article. Look more closely for those signpost words. They will probably indicate not only the overall argument, but how individual pieces such as definition fit. Write down each of these definitions. They will probably come in handy. As you read, ask such questions as, are there distinctions that the author makes? Are there distinctions that the philosopher fails to make? Are there assumptions or stereotypes the author is relying on? How do the thoughts connect with one another? As a reader reads the essay for another time, it is time to start asking such important questions. This puts one in a better position to evaluate the arguments put forward. In other words, once the reader understands the argument put forward, he or she can start deciding whether or not he or she agrees or disagrees with the argument. If a reader finds that he or she is disagreeing with the author because he or she is putting forward a position that makes no sense at all, then the reader might have missed a thing or two about the author's argument, for it is very rare to find a philosophical essay devoid of any meaning. The reader needs to go through the essay again to get the main point down again before proceeding to analyze and evaluate them. If the reader disagrees with the author, even though the author has a compelling argument, then he or she needs to state the specific reasons for disagreeing. Do the conclusions not follow from the argument? Are the definitions flawed, or is something missing? Are there implicitly taken for granted assumptions that force the reader to question the soundness of the argument? Often, these arguments are webs of interconnected ideas, and trying to understand everything the philosopher put forward would be a nearly impossible task. Even if the reader could understand everything, he or she would not be able to put everything learned in a single essay. Hence, a reader should not worry about trying to understand everything, but should still be able to articulate the overall structure of the argument. Things to watch out for. Generally, the best approach is to continually ask questions when you are reading the paper. Doing this usually leads to identifying and clarifying the main points of the essay. While reading through an essay, a reader should look through the following. The logic of the argument. This is definitely one of the most ambiguous and difficult areas to pinpoint. When we're looking for the logic of the argument, we're looking at the relationship between the claims and the evidence used to support those claims. Often philosophers are taking us on a short journey. They usually tell us the destination before getting there, and they also point out features of the trip on the way there. A reader searches for the main claim and the argument that support them. In this way, a longer paper can be summarized in just a few lines. A syllogism, perhaps. Fallacies. Fallacies are errors in arguments where the conclusions do not logically follow from the premise. Writers commit fallacies when they use certain unreliable patterns of reasoning to argue for their conclusions. If the claim made by a writer cannot be implied from the evidences provided, then a fallacy must have been committed. It is the duty of the reader to find out the exact fallacy or fallacies committed, and on the basis of these, an argument can be criticized and improved on. Points of criticism. There are a number of points that can make an essay susceptible to criticism. It could be that the argument doesn't accomplish its aim. If an argument starts out with a very clear intention, but never actually achieves this result, then there is a solid basis for criticism. It could be that the argument is internally contradictory. Sometimes an author will make a point in one section of the writing and then completely contradict himself in another section. A close reading of those sections would draw out this contradiction. It could also be that the argument's premises are false. It might be the case that the philosopher simply has certain facts wrong. If those facts are wrong, then it might be the case that the conclusion does not follow. A charitable reading would scrutinize those facts to ensure that their truthfulness is essential for the argument. Again, it could be that the argument has unjustified assumptions. A very patient and careful reading of the text will nearly always reveal certain assumptions that the philosopher relies on. If this assumption is unjustified, then it will create problems for the philosopher. It is not enough for an author to identify some assumptions. He or she must clearly show the importance of the assumption. If not, it gives the reader an easy point for criticism. Summary. From the foregoing, it follows that reading an essay in philosophy involves first reading quickly through the essay to get the main gist, reading through it again thoroughly and more carefully in order to analyze the argument and ask important questions that will reveal the strength and weakness of the essay. As the reader does this, he is able to identify the main arguments, the logic of the argument, and if any, fallacies that may have been committed and weak points of criticisms. If a reader takes the above guidelines to heart, he or she will be able to understand an essay and be able to develop his or her own viewpoints. It is also essential that when reading, a reader should read about the same issue from a number of essays in order to take into consideration various perspectives. This will give him or her richer basis to understand and approach the issue. This is the end of study session 7. Thanks for listening.